Hello, dear readers. Welcome to an extraordinary journey that will transport us to 19th century Mexico, where we will meet a woman whose courage and dignity defied all the standards of an era. This is the story of Soledad Milagros Herrera, a brave soul who proved that the true value of a person is not measured by appearances, but by the strength of the heart and the authenticity of being. Prepare yourself for a narrative that will touch your soul and make you reflect on the true values of life. A story about love, acceptance, dignity, and the courage to be who we are, regardless of what the world expects from us. Where are you watching us from? Leave your city in the comments. We would love to know where each of our precious readers comes from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps us a lot to continue bringing these touching stories to you. Year, 1876. City, Veracruz, Mexico. The salty breeze from the Gulf of Mexico carried with it more than the aroma of the sea. It also brought fragments of dreams that dissolved like foam in the waves. In the small adobe house on Flower Street in Veracruz, Soledad Milagros Herrera carefully folded her few dresses into a dark wooden trunk that had belonged to her mother. Her hands, always so skillful at kneading flour and shaping the bread that sustained her days, now trembled slightly as she caressed the patchwork quilt that would be her only reminder of that home. Each piece of fabric told a story. The faded blue of her first communion dress, the yellow that had once been golden like summer sun, the red that still held the warmth of maternal hands that had sewn it. The opaque mirror reflected a woman of imposing stature, with generous forms that did not go unnoticed in a world that still measured the value of ladies by the delicacy of their silhouettes. But Soledad Milagros had learned to find beauty in other places, in the constant tenderness of her expression, in the profound serenity of her brown eyes, in the human warmth she radiated even when others rejected her. Don Silverio Aguilar's letter rested on the pine table, its elegant letters promising a future she barely dared to dream. An arranged marriage, yes, but one that represented a chance to start over, to find a place in the world where she could be valued for her qualities, not judged by her appearance. The bell of San Sebastian Church echoed 5 times, marking the hour of farewell. Soledad Milagros closed the trunk with a sigh that carried 28 years of postponed hopes, picked up her travel bag, and headed to the train station. The train waited steaming, like an iron dragon ready to take her toward the unknown. As she settled on the hard wooden bench, she observed through the fogged window the city that had seen her born and grow, where she had been a respected baker, despite the whispers about her appearance. What secrets would Santa Clara del Llano hold? What destiny awaited her in Don Silverio Aguilar's lands? The red dust of Santa Clara del Llano stuck to Soledad Milagros's skirts like dried tears. The merciless late afternoon sun punished without pity the small station, where only a man with a thick mustache and wide-brimmed hat awaited her. It wasn't Don Silverio, just a foreman sent to fetch her as if she were a package to be delivered. The cart swayed over rocky paths until they reached Don Silverio Aguilar's hacienda. It was an imposing construction, with whitewashed walls and wide verandas, surrounded by gardens where jasmine and bougainvillea bloomed. Soledad Milagros descended with the dignity that always accompanied her, her black hair pinned in a bun, that the wind insisted on undoing. Don Silverio emerged from the house like a shadow laden with contempt. His small, calculating eyes traveled over Soledad Milagros's body from top to bottom, lingering without disguise on her generous forms. The silence that followed was more cutting than any word. "Not what I expected," he finally pronounced, his voice laden with a coldness that froze the hot afternoon air. Soledad Milagros felt the words like stabs in her chest, but kept her head high. She had faced judgmental looks all her life, and had learned that her dignity was a treasure no one could steal. "I understand, sir," she responded with a firm voice, although inside a storm of humiliation threatened to bring her down. The rancher didn't even offer water or shelter. He ordered the same foreman to take her back to the village, as if she were defective merchandise that needed to be returned. During the journey back, Soledad Milagros didn't shed a single tear. Her hands gripped the bag handle while she observed the sky tinged with red, as if the very sunset bled with shame. The central square of Santa Clara del Llano, the foreman left her with her trunk and her quilt, disappearing in the dust without a word of comfort. The people who passed whispered among themselves, their curious and pitying looks cutting like blades. Soledad Milagros remained there, standing, while night began to descend over her shattered hopes. But in her heart, a small but indomitable flame continued to shine. Where would she find shelter now? How would she rebuild her life in that strange land? Don Patricio Villarreal's apothecary exuded aromas of medicinal herbs and ancient wisdom. The man with white beard and round glasses found Soledad Milagros sitting in the square at dawn, still guarding her trunk like a soldier protects his weapons. Without asking questions about her story or judging her appearance, he offered her the small room in the back of the apothecary where he kept his empty flasks and dreams of healing. "A good woman always finds a place in my house," he said simply, his words falling like balm on Soledad Milagros's wounded heart. In the first days she remained withdrawn, silently healing the wounds of rejection, but her hands, accustomed to work, soon longed for activity. Don Patricio owned a small clay oven in the backyard, abandoned since his wife had died. Soledad Milagros asked permission to use it. With the flour she bought with her last coins, she began to create breads that exhaled aromas of cinnamon and hope. Her skillful hands shaped the dough like one who sculpts dreams, and soon the golden perfume attracted the first curious customers. In the central square, she spread the still warm breads on an improvised table. The village women approached hesitantly, some whispering about the girl rejected by Don Silverio, others genuinely admiring the perfect texture and incomparable flavor of her creations. Doña Refugio, the blacksmith's wife, was the first to publicly defend Soledad Milagros's work. "What does her appearance matter if her breads are the best I've ever tasted?" Gradually, Soledad Milagros won respect through her dedication and honesty. She rose before dawn, kneaded dough while the world still slept, and sold her breads with a genuine smile that disarmed even the most prejudiced. Coins began to jingle. In her bag and with them, a new form of hope. Not the naive hope of before, but something more solid, built on her own strength. One afternoon, while cleaning flour from her hands, she saw approaching a woman with a severe countenance, dressed in black, mounted in an elegant carriage. Who would this mysterious figure be? What news would she bring to her newly reconstructed life? Doña Esperanza descended from the carriage with the solemnity of one who carries on her shoulders more than 3 decades of faithful service. Her black garments whispered against the wind like dry leaves, and her grey eyes possessed the peculiar capacity to see beyond appearances. She had observed Soledad Milagros for weeks, not her generous figure or simple clothes, but the silent dignity with which she moved her skillful hands and the constant tenderness of her expression. "Doña Soledad Milagros Herrera," she pronounced with a grave voice, each syllable heavy with purpose. "I am Esperanza Morales, governess of Hacienda San Isidro. I came to offer you work." Soledad Milagros raised her eyes from the dough she was kneading, feeling her heart accelerate. She knew the Hacienda's reputation, property of the Maldonado family, one of the most respected in the region, shrouded in mourning since the death of the Countess. "Don Crisanto Teodoro Maldonado y Espinosa needs someone to care for his daughters," continued Doña Esperanza, ignoring the curious looks accumulating around them. "Someone who understands that true beauty resides in the heart, not in form." The governess's words echoed like celestial music in Soledad Milagros's ears. Someone finally recognized that her value was not in her silhouette, but in her human qualities. "The young ladies Remedios and Pilar lost their mother 2 years ago," explained Doña Esperanza, her voice softening slightly. "Since then, they live like shadows in a house that forgot how to smile. They need a maternal presence, someone to teach them again what the warmth of a home is." Soledad Milagros dried her hands on her apron, her heart beating like a festival drum. A chance to be useful, to care, to show that her hands served for more than kneading bread. They served to knead wounded souls and mold new happiness. "When should I start?" she asked, her voice firm despite the emotion that overcame her. "Tomorrow at dawn. I will send a carriage to fetch you." That night, Soledad Milagros carefully folded her few dresses, stored her patchwork quilt, and prepared for another journey. But this time it wasn't just naive hopes that moved her. It was the certainty that her capable hands and warm heart would finally find the place where they belonged. What secrets would the mourning house of the Maldonados hold? What would Don Crisanto be like, the widowed count with a closed heart? Hacienda San Isidro rose against the morning sky like a ship, stranded in a sea of mourning. Its white walls, which had once reflected joy, now seemed to absorb the sun's light without returning it. Gardens, once carefully tended, grew wild, and heavy curtains in the windows prevented life from the outside from contaminating the sadness cultivated within. Don Crisanto Teodoro Maldonado y Espinosa appeared on the main veranda like a figure carved in black marble. At 37 years old, he carried on his shoulders the weight of a pain that refused to heal. His dark garments wrapped him like a second skin, and his rigid posture suggested a man who had transformed suffering into armor. When his eyes met Soledad Milagros descending from the carriage, there was not the cold judgment she expected, only a silent recognition, as if he, too, was someone accustomed to being observed with curiosity and pity. His well-trimmed beard framed a face where time had engraved lines of sadness, but his eyes maintained a depth that suggested still waters, not dead waters. "Welcome to San Isidro," he said with a grave voice, each word measured as if he calculated the emotional cost of each syllable. Soledad Milagros bowed her head respectfully, feeling the solemnity of the moment. They were not just employer and employee meeting. They were two wounded souls recognizing in each other's scars a reflection of their own battles. Doña Esperanza led her through wide corridors where portraits of ancestors observed in silence. The windows were closed, creating a twilight that made the house seem suspended in time. The aroma of dried flowers and melancholy permeated every corner. "The girls await you in the back garden," informed the governess. "Remedios is 11 years old and Pilar 8. Since their mother's death, Remedios has assumed responsibilities beyond her age, while Pilar forgot how to be a child." When Soledad Milagros emerged in the back garden, she found two figures who seemed like characters from a melancholic tale. Remedios sat erect on a stone bench, her blue dress impeccably pressed, hair pinned in a bun so perfect it seemed painful. Her eyes, large and too serious for a child, examined Soledad Milagros with the distrust of one who learned early not to expect much from life. Pilar, smaller and more delicate, hid behind her sister like a wilted flower. Her brown curls fell, free over her shoulders, but there was no light in her eyes, only the emptiness of someone who had forgotten how to play. Soledad Milagros approached slowly, as one approaches wounded animals, and knelt in the grass at the girl's eye level. "Hello," she said simply, her voice laden with all the tenderness she had accumulated during years of solitude. It was then that she noticed a shadow in the second-floor window, Don Crisanto's silhouette, observing this first encounter with an intensity that made her heart race. What secrets did that man of silences hold? And how would she melt the ice that surrounded those children's hearts? The days at San Isidro passed with the cadence of a clock that marks only hours of melancholy. Soledad Milagros observed the girls with the patience of one who understands that some wounds only heal when touched by sufficiently gentle hands. Remedios maintained her rigid posture during lessons, answering questions with mathematical precision, but without letting escape a single drop of genuine emotion. Pilar remained mute most of the time, playing with dolls she treated as if they were made of glass. It was on a September afternoon, when the wind carried the sweet aroma of the first rains, that Pilar finally broke the silence. Soledad Milagros was in the kitchen, preparing a peach compote whose perfume spread through the house like an invitation to life. "Mama used to do it like this," whispered the girl, appearing in the doorway like a curious ghost. Soledad Milagros didn't turn immediately, fearing any sudden movement might frighten away that first opening. "How did she do it?" she asked softly, continuing to stir the compote. "She sang while cooking. She said food tastes better when seasoned with music." "What song did she sing?" Pilar approached slowly, and for the first time since she had arrived, Soledad Milagros saw a glimmer of life in the child's eyes. La golondrina. Mama said it was her heart's song. Soledad Milagros began to hum the melody softly, and it was as if a gentle spell began to break the invisible chains that bound the house to mourning. Pilar came closer, then closer still, until she found herself standing beside the generous woman who smelled of cinnamon and affection. "May I help?" she asked in a voice so low it was more like a whisper of dry leaves. "Of course, my dear. Your hands are small, perfect for stirring without breaking." While they worked together, something magical began to happen. Pilar began to tell fragmented stories about her mother, small treasures of memory she had kept like seeds in winter's heart. She spoke of the secret garden where Consuelo wrote her letters, of dresses that smelled like roses, of nights when she told stories until sleep came gently. "Where is this secret garden?" asked Soledad Milagros, sensing she was approaching something important. "Behind the house, beyond the stone wall. No one goes there anymore. Papa said it's better to leave some doors closed." That afternoon, after the compote cooled and Pilar returned to her books, Soledad Milagros ventured beyond the stone wall. What she found was an abandoned garden where nature had reclaimed its territory, but where it was still possible to perceive the remains of a carefully planned paradise. There was a wrought iron bench under a pergola, where jasmine grew wild, and in the center a silent fountain where dry petals floated like crystallized tears. She didn't notice that from his office window, Don Crisanto observed each of her movements, his eyes studying this woman who dared to step on sacred territory with as much reverence as his deceased wife. What memories would awaken in that forgotten garden? And why was Don Crisanto's heart beginning to beat differently? Doña Dolores Cifuentes possessed the peculiar gift of transforming whispers into storms. Seated in her worn velvet armchair, in the parlor of the house that had once been grand, she wielded her fan like a general wields a sword, and her tongue sharp as a needle cut, reputations with the precision of a surgeon. The arrival of Soledad Milagros at Hacienda San Isidro did not go unnoticed by the vigilant eyes of Santa Clara del Llano society. Like a spider in her web, Dolores collected information, chewed it slowly, and spat it out transformed into pure poison. "It's unbelievable," she murmured to her friend Doña Carlota while taking tea on a suffocating afternoon. "A woman like that, rejected by Silverio himself for her generous proportions, now lives in the most respected house in the valley. What kind of enchantment could she have used?" Dolores knew exactly how to plant seeds of doubt. Her words were calculated to germinate in people's minds like weeds, growing until they covered all truth with their poisonous shadow. "They say the Count hasn't left his office since she arrived," she continued, the fan moving like bat wings. "A mourning widow needs much care to be consoled, and she, poor thing, must be so desperate for a home that she would be capable of anything." The words spread through the village like oil in water, staining conversations and tinting looks. In the square where Soledad Milagros had once sold her bread with earned respect, she now faced disguised whispers and false smiles that hid cruel judgments. "Beware of that one," Dolores warned anyone who would listen. "A woman with her appearance could only have reached the hacienda using unconventional resources. Mark my words, soon we'll see scandal." The venom of her words reached Don Abundio Trevino, her husband and town councilman, an ambitious man who had for years envied the respect Don Crisanto still maintained in the valley, even in his mourning. He saw in the situation a golden opportunity to stain the Maldonado family's reputation. "It is our moral duty to investigate," he declared in a meeting at the mayor's house. "We cannot allow inappropriate influences to contaminate our community. A family like the Maldonados must set an example of moral propriety." Meanwhile, at Hacienda San Isidro, Soledad Milagros felt the weight of looks change when she visited the village. She didn't fully understand what was being plotted, but her intuition as a woman accustomed to facing judgments alerted her that storms were approaching. One afternoon, Doña Esperanza approached her with an expression darker than usual. "There are rumors circulating," she said without beating around the bush. "Rumors about your presence here. Perhaps it would be prudent to keep yourself more discreet for some time." Soledad Milagros felt a familiar cold in her stomach. Again, her appearance and condition were being used as weapons against her. What storm was approaching, and how would she protect the fragile peace she had begun to build in that morning house? Don Crisanto's office was a sanctuary of organized melancholy. Accounting books aligned on shelves like soldiers in formation, and his polished mahogany desk reflected light filtered through heavy curtains. It was there he took refuge when memories became too heavy to carry in public. On that October night, while rain drummed against the windows like impatient fingers, he searched for an important document when his hands found a drawer that hadn't opened in 2 years. With his heart racing, he forced the small lock and found a treasure he thought lost, letters from Consuelo, written during her last months of life. His wife's delicate handwriting danced on paper like memories of brighter days. Some letters spoke of everyday matters, the girl's progress, garden plans, recipes she wanted to teach her daughters when they grew up. But one letter, dated just a week before her death, made his hands tremble. My dear Crisanto, if you are reading this, it means I have already gone to join the angels. I don't want you to live as a shadow of our past happiness. The love we built was real, but it must not become a prison for your heart. Promise me that one day you will learn to love again, not out of obligation, but because your heart is too generous to remain empty forever. Look for someone who loves our girls not out of duty but by choice, someone who sees beauty where others see only differences. True love is not found in the perfection of forms, but in the perfection of the soul. Your eternal Consuelo. The words echoed in the office's silence like celestial music. Don Crisanto closed his eyes and for the first time in 2 years allowed tears to come. Not tears of despair, but tears of liberation from a guilt he carried without realizing. When he finished crying, he rose and walked to the window. In the back garden, a soft light shone. Soledad Milagros was still working in the kitchen, preparing something special for the girls' breakfast. He observed her for a long time, noticing for the first time not her generous figure, but the delicacy of her movements, the tenderness with which she treated each task. The following morning, for the first time since Consuelo's death, Don Crisanto came down for family breakfast. Soledad Milagros was serving Pilar when he entered the dining room, and the silence that followed was laden with surprise. "Good morning," he said, his voice different, softer. "Good morning, Papa," the girls responded in unison, Pilar with spontaneous joy, Remedios with her usual formality. "Doña Soledad," he continued, addressing her directly for the first time, "I would like you to join us for dinner today. In the main dining room." The words fell like petals on still water, creating waves of surprise that spread throughout the house. What change would this be in the mourning count's heart? And how would Soledad Milagros respond to this unexpected invitation? The illness arrived like a silent thief on a November night. Remedios, always so controlled and precise in all her movements, awakened with a burning forehead and body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Doña Esperanza ran to fetch Don Patricio, while Soledad Milagros installed herself beside the girls, bed like a guardian angel of generous forms. Don Crisanto paced the corridor like a caged animal, his steps echoing his anguish. The idea of losing another beloved person made his chest tighten with a pain that brought him back to the worst. Moments of mourning for Consuelo. When he saw Soledad Milagros emerge from his daughter's room, her clothes wrinkled after an entire night of vigil, something broke inside his chest. "How is she?" he asked, his voice hoarse with worry. "The fever lowered a bit," responded Soledad Milagros, exhausted but not defeated. "She asked for water and managed to take a few sips. It's a good sign." Don Crisanto observed the tired face of this woman, who had spent the night applying cold compresses, singing lullabies softly and whispering words of comfort in his daughter's ear. She hadn't slept or even dozed, dedicating every moment to caring for a child who wasn't hers by blood, but who was becoming hers by choice. "You should rest," he murmured, noticing the dark circles framing Soledad Milagros's kind eyes. "Not while she needs me." It was then they heard a weak voice from the room. Mama, I'm thirsty. Don Crisanto and Soledad Milagros looked into each other's eyes, the air laden with meaning. Remedios, in her feverish delirium, had called Soledad Milagros mother. The generous woman felt her heart race. She didn't know if she should correct the child or simply attend to her. "Go," whispered Don Crisanto, his voice choked with emotion. "She needs her mother." Soledad Milagros entered the room and knelt beside the bed. Remedios, with eyes glazed by fever, extended her thin arms toward her. "Mama, you won't leave, will you?" "No, my dear," responded Soledad Milagros, her voice breaking with emotion while embracing the girl. "I'm not going anywhere." From the doorway, Don Crisanto observed the scene with his heart broken and recomposed at the same time. He saw his eldest daughter, always so rigid and controlled, surrendering to the comfort of the generous arms of a woman destiny had brought to his house. For 3 days, Soledad Milagros didn't leave Remedios' side. She sang lullabies, told stories of brave princesses, and let the girl grip her hands every time fever's nightmares frightened her. When the fever finally broke and Remedios opened her eyes with clarity, the first thing she said was, "Thank you for staying with me, Mama Soledad." This time, she was completely lucid. How would Don Crisanto react to this profound change in his daughter? And what would it mean for the future of that wounded family? The weekly fair of Santa Clara del Llano bustled with colors and aromas that danced under the strong December sun. Soledad Milagros walked among the stalls looking for fresh ingredients for the special lunch she would prepare. It was Pilar's birthday, and the girl had timidly asked for her favorite dish, chicken with almond sauce, a recipe her mother Consuelo used to make. It was when Don Silverio Aguilar appeared in his luxurious carriage, descending with his usual arrogance. His eyes met Soledad Milagros's through the crowd, and a cruel smile drew on his lips. The humiliation he had inflicted months before still amused him, and her presence at the fair was an irresistible opportunity to reaffirm his superiority. "Well, well," he said loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. "If it isn't the woman I had to return for being, well, inadequate for a quality man's standards." The whispers began immediately. Vendors stopped their activities. Buyers turned to observe the spectacle that was announced. Soledad Milagros felt blood freeze in her veins, but maintained her erect and dignified posture. "A pity that some men cannot see beyond appearances," she responded with a firm voice, her words cutting the hot air like a sharp blade. "Appearances?" Don Silverio laughed loudly, an unpleasant sound that echoed through the square. "My dear lady, a man of position has the right to choose a wife who won't embarrass him in public. A woman with your generosity of forms wouldn't be adequate to represent my family." The silence that followed was tense as a violin string about to snap. Soledad Milagros felt tears threaten her eyes, but before she could respond, a grave and authoritative voice cut the air like thunder. "It would be interesting to know what you understand by shame." Don Crisanto emerged from the crowd like a contained storm. His dark garments and impeccable posture contrasted with Silverio's vulgarity, and his immediate presence changed the entire atmosphere of the square. People respectfully stepped away, recognizing the Count's natural authority. "Crisanto," stammered Silverio, clearly uncomfortable, "I didn't know you were in town." "Evidently," responded Don Crisanto, positioning himself beside Soledad Milagros in a clear demonstration of protection. "Otherwise, I imagine you would have chosen your words more carefully." The two men's eyes met in a silent duel. Silverio represented everything Don Crisanto despised: superficiality, cruelty disguised as social standards, the inability to recognize true value. "In my house," continued Don Crisanto, his voice low but laden with authority, "one does not insult a lady, and any man who judges a woman's value only by her physical appearance reveals more about his own limitations than about her." Silverio paled, realizing he had created a powerful enemy. He mumbled some inadequate apologies and hastily withdrew, but the damage was done. The entire city had witnessed not only the insult, but also the public defense of Soledad Milagros by one of the region's most respected men. When the crowd dispersed, Don Crisanto offered his arm to Soledad Milagros. "Allow me to accompany you home." They walked in silence for the first meters, the weight of what had happened hanging between them like an invisible bridge that had finally been completed. What consequences would this public defense bring, and how would it change the relationship between them? Consuelo's secret garden had been resurrected under the care of Soledad Milagros and Pilar. The jasmine grew again, organized in the pergola. The fountain returned to whisper with crystalline water, and careful flower beds displayed roses that perfumed the air with renewed hope. It was there that Don Crisanto found Soledad Milagros on a January afternoon, when the sun filtered through leaves creating golden patterns on the stone floor. She was kneeling beside a flower bed, planting sunflower seeds that Pilar had chosen, because Mama Consuelo loved flowers that follow the sun. Her hands, always so skillful, caressed the earth with the same tenderness with which she caressed the girl's hair. "Soledad," he said, approaching slowly. It was the first time he pronounced only her name, without the formalities that maintained distance between their hearts. She raised her eyes, her hands still dirty with earth, and saw something different in Don Crisanto's expression. His dark eyes no longer carried only melancholy. There was a light in them that she didn't know, if she dared interpret. "Crisanto," she responded softly, also abandoning formalities. He knelt beside her, his dark clothes contrasting with the light earth. For a moment they remained in silence, planting together the seeds that would grow as symbols of new life. "Consuelo left me a letter," he began, his voice low like a confession. "She asked me not to transform our love into a prison for my heart. She asked me to find someone who would love our daughters by choice, not by duty." Soledad Milagros felt her heart accelerate, but didn't dare interrupt. "Him? For months I wondered if I would ever be capable of loving again. I thought my heart had become permanent winter." He paused, looking at her hands. "But then you arrived with your silent strength, your genuine kindness, your way of making our house breathe again." "Crisanto," she murmured, but he continued. "I don't care what they say in the village about your appearance. I don't care that Don Silverio was too blind to see your value. You brought life back to this house, warmth to hearts that forgot how to warm themselves." He took her hands in his, earth and all. "I want to ask you to marry me, Soledad Milagros Herrera, not for convenience, not for necessity, but because you conquered a heart that thought itself incapable of loving again." Tears ran freely down Soledad Milagros's face, tears of pure joy that had waited 28 years to be shed. "Yes," she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. "Yes, I accept to be your wife, Crisanto." He leaned in and kissed her softly, a kiss that sealed not only a commitment, but the healing of two souls that had found in each other the perfect complement. From the house's second floor, Remedios and Pilar observed through the window, their hands intertwined, genuine smiles illuminating their faces for the first time in years. "Now we're a real family," whispered Pilar. "Yes," agreed Remedios, her voice no longer cold, but warmed by happiness. "A real family." But what storm still approached to test this newly found happiness? The letter arrived on a February morning, slipped under the main door of Hacienda San Isidro like a paper serpent. It bore no signature or identification, only venomous words written in disguised handwriting. "To the respectable Don Crisanto Maldonado y Espinosa, it is with Christian concern that we address you. The entire village comments on your decision to marry the woman rejected by Don Silverio. A person of your social position should not lower himself to such a point. What stratagems could a woman of such generous appearance have used to blind a man of your education? Beware of being deceived by one who has nothing to lose and everything to gain, a friend concerned with your reputation." Don Crisanto read the letter twice, his hands trembling not with fear, but with indignation. He recognized the venomous style. There was only one person in Santa Clara del Llano capable of such cowardice, Doña Dolores Cifuentes, the viper in skirts who distilled bile in every conversation. That afternoon he dressed in his finest garments and headed to the town center. His carriage stopped in front of Dolores and Abundio's house, and he descended with the solemnity of a judge about to pronounce sentence. The Cifuentes' house parlor was full of visitors for afternoon tea. It was exactly what Don Crisanto expected. Dolores paled when she saw him enter, her fan trembling in her hands like wounded butterfly wings. "Doña Dolores," he said, his voice echoing through the silent room, "I came to return something I believe you lost." He extended the anonymous letter to her, and the silence that followed was absolute. All the ladies present observed while Dolores read the very poison she had distilled. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her red cheeks betrayed her. "I imagine not," responded Don Crisanto, his irony cutting like a blade. "But since I'm here, allow me to clarify some points for your guests." He turned to the other women, and his dominant presence made them all shrink in their chairs. "I will marry Doña Soledad Milagros Herrera for a very simple reason. She is a woman of exceptional value. Her qualities are not measured by the delicacy of her silhouette, but by the generosity of her heart. My daughters adore her, my house was reborn under her care, and I found in her a companion worthy of my respect and love." The words echoed like a judge's hammer. Dolores tried to murmur some objection, but he silenced her with an icy look. "Anyone who questions my choice is questioning my judgment, and anyone who insulted this lady will answer directly to me." He paused, his eyes sweeping each face present. "I hope I have been clear." He left the house, leaving behind sepulchral silence. On the street, he found a small group of people who had gathered, attracted by the Count's carriage. Without hesitating, he repeated his words for all who wanted to hear. "A person's value is not measured by their physical appearance," he declared aloud, "and any society that judges thus reveals only its own poverty of spirit." When he returned home, he found Soledad Milagros waiting for him on the veranda, her eyes full of gratitude and love. "You didn't need to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did," he replied, taking her hands. "The world needs to know that you are worth more than all the empty opinions that try to diminish us." But what consequences would this public declaration of war against the village's prejudices bring? The Harvest Ball was the most important social event in Santa Clara del Llano, when all local society gathered in the town hall to celebrate the year's blessings. For Soledad Milagros, it represented the ultimate test, appearing in public as the fiancée of the region's most respected man, under the gaze of all who had judged and rejected her. At Hacienda San Isidro, preparations began a week before. Doña Esperanza, in a rare gesture of affection, offered to help with the dress. Together, they chose a navy blue fabric that enhanced Soledad Milagros's serene eyes, cut to honor her generous forms instead of hiding them. "Don't try to appear smaller than you are," advised Esperanza, while adjusting the measurements. "You have the right to occupy the space you deserve." On the night of the ball, Remedios and Pilar watched in ecstasy while Soledad Milagros dressed. Her hair was pinned in an elegant bun, with some loose strands framing her face. A simple pearl necklace completed the look of serene dignity. "You look beautiful, Mama Soledad," whispered Pilar, naturally using the title she had chosen for her. When Don Crisanto saw her descending the stairs, he was clothed in genuine admiration. He offered her his arm with evident pride, as if he were a prince escorting his princess to the royal ball. Their arrival at the town hall caused the silence they expected. All eyes turned to the couple, he impeccable in his black tuxedo, she radiant in her blue dress. Dolores Cifuentes, leaning against a wall with her husband, observed with the expression of one who had swallowed her own poison. Don Crisanto led Soledad Milagros through the hall with royal solemnity, greeting acquaintances and formally presenting her as his fiancée. Each presentation was a small victory against prejudices. Each respectful bow she received was a brick in building her social acceptance. When the band began to play a waltz, Don Crisanto extended his hand to her. "Would you grant me this dance?" Soledad Milagros hesitated only an instant. Dancing meant completely exposing herself to looks, showing her generous forms in movement, becoming the center of attention. But in Crisanto's eyes she saw only love and pride. "It would be an honor," she replied, placing her hand in his. They walked together to the center of the hall, and when he took her in his arms for the dance, all whispers fell silent. They danced with surprising grace, he leading her with tenderness, she following him with confidence. Her generous forms moved with natural elegance, and her face radiated genuine happiness. Other people began to join the dance, but for long moments it was just the two of them, slowly spinning under the golden lights, while all of Santa Clara del Llano witnessed that true love is not measured by conventional standards. Don Patricio, the kind apothecary, was the first to applaud when the music ended. Gradually others joined in until the entire hall echoed with sincere applause. "To the happiness of the engaged couple," someone toasted, and the chorus of cheers spread through the hall. Dolores Cifuentes remained silent in her corner, observing how her poisons lost strength before the evidence of genuine love. When they returned home that night, Soledad Milagros knew she had crossed an invisible bridge. She was no longer the rejected woman. She was the future Countess Maldonado, respected in her own right. But what surprises would the wedding day hold? The Church of Santa Clara del Llano had never witnessed a ceremony so laden with meaning. Wild flowers gathered by Pilar's own hands decorated the altar, and the morning sun entered through colored windows, creating rainbows that danced over the dark wooden pews. Soledad Milagros waited in the church's small vestibule, her wedding dress sewn by her own hands, ivory silk that embraced her generous forms with regal dignity. The lace veil had belonged to Don Crisanto's mother, offered by Doña Esperanza, as a symbol of acceptance into the family. "Are you ready?" asked Don Patricio, who had requested the honor of walking her to the altar in the absence of family. "More than I have ever been in my entire life," she replied, her voice firm despite the emotion that made her heart beat like a festival drum. When the church doors opened and the wedding march began to play on the old organ, Soledad Milagros walked down the central aisle with the majesty of a queen. Each step was a declaration of dignity, each raised look was a victory over years of humiliation. Don Crisanto awaited her at the altar, his eyes shining with tears of joy he didn't try to hide. He wore his finest suit and his face had lost the deep lines of sadness he had carried for so long. Remedios and Pilar occupied the first pew, dressed in light blue, their faces radiating genuine happiness. Behind them, Don Patricio and Doña Esperanza represented the chosen family. That forms when true love finds fertile ground. Father Joaquin, an elderly man who had known 3 generations of the Maldonado family, conducted the ceremony with touching solemnity. When the moment for vows arrived, his voice echoed through the stone walls. "Don Crisanto Teodoro Maldonado y Espinosa, do you accept Soledad Milagros Herrera as your lawful wife, promising to respect her in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness? Until death do you part?" "I do," responded Don Crisanto, his voice laden with absolute conviction. "And I promise to honor her in her silences, admire her in her strength, and love her in her totality. For I found in her not just a wife, but the completeness of my soul. Doña Soledad Milagros Herrera, do you accept Don Crisanto Teodoro Maldonado y Espinosa as your lawful husband, promising to respect him in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness, until death do you part?" Soledad Milagros raised her face, her eyes meeting his with unshakable certainty. "I do," she said, her voice echoing through the church like a bronze bell. "And I promise to be for you a true companion, a dedicated mother to your daughters, and a woman of earth, fire, and truth, because I learned that love is not measured by the delicacy of forms, but by the greatness of the heart." When they exchanged rings, they were rings forged not only in gold, but in mutual understanding, deep respect and love that transcended all social conventions. "By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife," proclaimed Father Joaquin. "What God has joined, let no man separate." The kiss that sealed their union was gentle and respectful, but laden with all the contained passion of 2 hearts that had waited so long to find each other. Outside the church, the bells rang, announcing to the entire city that true love had triumphed over prejudice and convention. In the central square, some people gathered to congratulate the newlyweds, and Soledad Milagros, now Countess Maldonado, received each congratulation with the grace of one who had finally found her place in the world. Dolores Cifuentes observed from afar, her tongue finally silenced by the evidence that some loves are too strong to be destroyed by social poison. At the intimate celebration that followed at Hacienda San Isidro, Remedios raised a touching toast. To our new mother who taught us that family is built with love, not blood. And Pilar, now 9 years old and wiser than many adults, whispered in her stepmother's ear, "Mama Consuelo would be happy that Papa found you." That night, when the last guests departed and the house sank into blessed silence, Don Crisanto and Soledad Milagros walked together through the secret garden, now transformed into a symbol of rebirth. "I'm not afraid of the future," she murmured, her head resting on his shoulder. "Neither am I," he replied, kissing her forehead, "because we will build this future together, with our own hands, our own hearts." Epilogue. 5 years later, the garden of Hacienda San Isidro bloomed in colors that rivaled the rainbow itself. Soledad Milagros, now Countess Maldonado, observed from her veranda, while Teodoro, her 4-year-old son, ran among the flower beds chasing butterflies with the spontaneous joy he inherited from his mother and the silent determination that came from his father. Her hair was slightly gray at the temples, but her face radiated a serenity that only comes when one finds their true place in the world. Her forms remained generous, but now they were seen by the entire community as symbols of abundance and loving motherhood. Remedios, at 16, had become a teacher for the village children, teaching them not only letters and numbers, but tolerance and acceptance of differences. Pilar, at 13, had grown like a flower in the sun, singing in the kitchen while helping Soledad Milagros prepare the bread she still sold in the square, now not out of necessity, but because she liked to maintain connection with her origins. Don Crisanto emerged from his office earlier each day, his temples completely gray but his eyes shining with deep contentment. He had found in his wife not just a companion, but a true partner in rebuilding his family's happiness. "How was the day in the village?" he asked, embracing her from behind while they watched the children play. Doña Esperanza said that 3 more families asked to enroll their children in Remedios's classes, replied Soledad Milagros, leaning against her husband's strong chest. And young Alberto, the blacksmith's son, asked to speak with me about marriage. He wants to marry Teresa, the baker's daughter, but fears her family will reject him because he is lame. And what did you tell him? To tell our story. That true love always finds a way when there is courage to pursue it. From her armchair on the back porch of her increasingly empty house, Dolores Cifuentes observed life flourishing at Hacienda San Isidro and reflected bitterly on how her poisonous tongue had resulted only in her own isolation. Abundio had abandoned her the previous year, tired of living with a woman who distilled bile in every conversation. In the central square, a small but significant statue had been erected the previous year, in honor of courageous women who transform obstacles into opportunities. Every Thursday, Soledad Milagros passed by on her way back from the market, always stopping to arrange the wild flowers someone left anonymously at the monument's base. "Mama Soledad," called Teodoro, running toward the veranda with a sunflower. He had picked, "This is for you." She knelt to receive the flower, embracing the boy whose eyes contained all the joy she once thought she would never have the right to know. "Thank you, my treasure," she whispered, kissing his forehead speckled with earth. "Sunflowers have always been my favorite flowers. They teach us to always turn our faces toward the light." That night, while the entire family gathered for dinner, in the main dining room, now cheerful and full of natural light, Soledad Milagros raised a silent prayer of gratitude. She had learned that a person's true value is never measured by social conventions, but by the authenticity of the heart, and the courage to remain true to oneself, even when the entire world seems to conspire against. Don Crisanto took her hand over the table, intertwining their fingers with the familiarity of one who found their true home. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That some seeds need to go through the most rigorous winter to bloom in the most beautiful spring," she replied, looking around the table where her chosen family shared not only food, but unconditional love. And while the sun set over Santa Clara del Llano, tinting the sky gold and red. Hacienda San Isidro radiated the warm light of a home where love had triumphed over prejudice, where dignity had defeated humiliation, and where a woman of generous forms had proven that true human value is measured by the greatness of the soul, not by the delicacy of appearances. In the secret garden that now bloomed as a symbol of rebirth, the wind carried the perfume of jasmine and the distant echo of a lesson that would echo through generations. True love knows no form or measure. It knows only the depth of hearts brave enough to love beyond conventions.